Hey everyone, my name is Chad Van Handel. I'm the Chief Lending Officer at Unison Credit Union. We've got another exciting episode for you of the Utalk Podcast Real Estate Edition today. Joining me in the studio is Brian Davis. Brian is a super exciting entrepreneurial guy that's going to give you some real good nuggets today about real estate investing. He started his career in 2006 and it really has been in the long haul. He's had some really good successes and he's had some failures that he's going to talk about as well on the way. But again, he's been someone who's lived through a lot of things. And with that, we'll welcome Brian Davis to the podcast. We've got a great story, so we're excited to dig in. I think the first thing is let's just talk about when did the real estate bug hit you, and how did you get started in real estate?
So for me, the first inkling of it was my dad was always in real estate, and then we partnered on I was told that we were partnering on a condo in St. Louis that we bought together, but really he handled everything from start to finish. And at the end of it all, I got a check, which was helpful, but at the same time, I didn't learn anything. And I was like, man, I really want to learn the ins and outs of buying and selling real estate. So over time, I figured if you want to do that, you got to just do it yourself. So then I started getting hooked on the bug, and I started staying up late watching infomercials, and one of them was the famous Carlton Sheets with buy houses, no money down. And
Sure.
I ran into somebody at a party that had enrolled in the course, and she had good things to say about it. So I finally pulled the trigger and bought that course. And then I even went the next step and signed up for coaching. And that was the thing that finally got me off the ledge to go look at properties, because really the coaching consisted of, so you want to be a real estate investor? Yeah. Okay, well, you got to go look at houses.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So that's what got me out of the house and starting to look at houses. And luckily, the first house I ran into, the agent that was showing me that house ended up becoming my mentor in real estate. Chuck is his name, and was super influential in helping me not make a million mistakes, and really provided a unique thought process approaching real estate. So I'm thankful that Chuck came into my life and molded my future with real estate.
So what was the timing from the St. Louis real estate introduction to when you actually purchased your first property there?
Yeah, the St. Louis transaction with my dad was a condo we bought. I think it was in 2002, and we got rid of it in 2004, I believe, something like that. So I got a check for like $10,000, and that was enough to help me buy the house that my wife and I moved into when I moved to this area from Chicago originally. And then so then I learned a lot about real estate from buying that first house
Sure.
that we lived in, of course, and then just kept wanting to grow and grow. And I had a day job, and I was, as most people that get into real estate are kind of getting frustrated with having a day job and wanting to do something else. So that was the push, was to figure out a way to get income without my time being impacted. So
And I think it's important to just kind of reset the time of 2006 and what it was like in that area, because it was a number of years ago, but I think you're starting to get this boom that maybe some younger investors maybe don't understand what was going on, and so maybe talk about what the time was like in real estate.
So when I started, there were cracks in the armor of real estate even in 06, before 08 was widely known as the time when everything kind of fell apart in real estate for that bubble, at least. But in 06, there were problems, right? There was plenty of foreclosures, and that's generally what I was buying: foreclosures, or somebody was sick and going into a nursing home, or dealing with grandma's house or something like that. So the houses I bought were still pretty distressed, but they were nothing like they would have cost me in 08. So I definitely paid more in 06 than they were worth in 08, all the way through probably 2012, before I sort of came out even in terms of equity. But in 2006, it was real easy to get a loan, and everyone could get a loan. So there was some competition for houses because everybody could be an investor. And I think the problem is people got excited and got way over leveraged.
Sure.
Way over leveraged. So that was something that I was on my way to doing. Had I started in 2004, I bet I would have gotten to the point that I got myself in a lot of trouble.
Sure.
So I think a good piece of advice people ask me all the time, I want to invest in real estate, so I have my kind of standard things I go through. And one of those is calibrate your expectations. And if you can buy one property a year, that's probably a good cadence. Anything beyond that is you're not ready for that for a while. So go for one a year, get it to 4 or 5, and then you can figure out if this is the right life for you and scale up, or plan on owning those 5 for another 5 years and then get out, but don't get out before then. So it's a get rich slow program.
Yeah. So that first property, what was it? It was a fixer upper, or was it foreclosure? What kind of, or was that your home, or what?
No.
No.
Well, the first one I bought was a home from my wife and I, which
Okay.
I still own and now as a rental. But my first investment property was over on the west side of Appleton at near Stuck's Pizza, and I still own it. And that's the one I just converted over to Airbnb. So life was in rough shape. It was a foreclosure, and yeah, I learned. Yeah, it was rough shape.
Take me through maybe the numbers process. How did you decide? How much am I going to put into this, or how much do I need to put into this for this to be inhabitable by a renter?
Well, at that time, Chuck, the person who was kind of mentoring me, there was a lot of creative financing in his methodology and just in general in the market at that time. So the plan was to rent it if you had to, but try to get it on a second mortgage for someone to buy it from you on a second mortgage. So there would be a premium for me if I was taking the risk of a second mortgage, or to do a lease with option to purchase. Those were wildly popular then. So generally speaking, I didn't do a ton to the properties, and then I would advertise lease with option to purchase for really not much stake, and people would jump on it. They would absolutely take it. But what I found over time is they're not equipped to own a house in any way, shape, or form. There's just no way around it. So it was there was a lot of damage to the houses. And, a lot of crushed dreams of the people that thought they were going to own a house someday. And they certainly could have. There was nothing nefarious on my end. I'm more than happy to live up to that expectation that I set. And time and time again, they would fail. And I would be left cleaning up the pieces, which is fine. That's part of the game, right? But it's not, it just never... So I got a little disillusioned with that over time, and then I finally quit doing it, and we just let's just rent these houses and let's get them fixed up to the point where they're not awful, and let's start doing the basics like background checks and credit checks and doing those things. So when I got to the point of having a property manager, that was an inflection point in the business where the reason I got a property manager is because being a landlord was affecting my outlook on humanity in general. So I had to do something about that. And I wasn't as detail-oriented as you need to be to manage your own properties. And I was just getting to the point where I had too many to do, for me at least, to do on my own. So that's why I got a property manager. And then we started doing all those things that you're supposed to do as a good landlord. And it took a lot of money to get it turned around, but then now it's been going fine. But I guess that'd be my advice: is start that way. Don't start with, because like a classic story is people would move in and the paint would be, almost up to the ceiling, but not quite. It would only be as high as the previous person could reach. And then the new tenant would say like, well, are you going to paint the walls? And I said, well, I would think about it, but if you want to paint it, you can paint it whatever color you want. And they'd get super excited about that. So then they would paint it, and they would do the same thing with their roller, except it'd be a different color. And then I would tell the next person, well, you can paint it. So it was cheaper for me short term, but long term, of course, it beat up the properties pretty good. So
were you excited about the prospect of swinging the hammer and changing the toilets and doing some of that work, or were you more, I want to own the properties and I'll get some contractors in to do that?
Yeah, I'm definitely not a hammer swinging type of guy. That's not my skill set. So I'm good at the marketing end of things and talking to folks and sort of selling creative financing to the folks that would come in and not even sell again, legitimately they could get all these things if they would follow the program, but they just wouldn't do it. So it was I had to hire people to come in and do stuff, and then that reduces your ability to keep up with the properties as well, because it's just so expensive to do. So there's a number of years where I didn't make any money lost a lot of money on real estate in terms of my tax returns, which is a whole nother conversation. But over time, again, real estate's get rich slow program, over time, hold the property and you'll solve almost all the problems in real estate.
So that the contractor that you've worked with maybe in 06 and 07, is that person still part of your team, or have you gone through a couple different contractors?
When I was managing the properties, I had somebody named Jeremy, and he did a lot of the handyman stuff and did a great job. And then when I handed off management to my property manager, they have their own group of folks. So Jeremy and I lost touch. And now lately I'm doing some more rehab stuff to convert some units over to Airbnb, and I've gotten I had one contractor and then he wasn't available for the next one, so I had to find another one. So I'm kind of bounced around a few times, and but that's okay. I think I'm almost done with having contractors in my life, which will be nice. And then we'll take a deep breath and see how the Airbnb / long-term rental business goes. So
let's go back to the 07, 08 timeframe, because I think although it's not the same right now, we are starting to see people flood into real estate and want to do real estate. Just talk about how you ramped up, how you went through, and when you put on the brakes, or how you were able to put on the brakes and get through that.
Yeah, so I got excited. I'm a hustle, go do stuff. Like, why wait? Let's just get moving kind of guy. And then you get smacked with something like 08, and that really slows you down. And thank goodness it did. So we were talking before the show, and if I would have started a few years earlier, I would have gotten myself into trouble. But I started at 06. I only had 2 years to get myself into trouble, and then it just occurred to me through some various meetings and talking to other people that that's probably enough real estate for now. Things aren't looking good. Reading the tea leaves made sense. This is going to head the wrong direction. There was a house in my neighborhood that got sold to someone who I don't think I would have even rented to this person. And I'm pretty flexible on renting at that time. And this person owns a house. And I'm like, that's mind boggling. Yeah. So there were some obvious problems in the real estate market then. So what I'm seeing now is people flooding into real estate, which is true, and I'm seeing prices go really, really high. But I'm not seeing some of the huge problems, systemic problems that we had last time. So what I mean by that is, we might have some foreclosures coming up. We might have a distressed job market and those types of things. But these are people that are still fundamentally good people. They qualified for a mortgage at one point because they're fundamentally a good person and have earning capability. And that was not the case in 2008, where we're giving loans to people that had no capacity to the
ninja loans, no income, no jobs.
No job, right? That's just the words are enough to say that's a bad idea. So we're not seeing that. My friends and I were talking about where the housing market is headed, and I think we're in a good place. But anyway, sorry to dance around on your question, but where I started was I got that confidence from that St. Louis property. I got the confidence from buying my own house, and it was just chipping away at this confidence issue. And I think that's where, when I talk to new investors that want to jump into real estate, one, slow down. Don't try to buy 1 million properties right off the bat. Don't try to replace your entire income in one shot. Bankers are not going to like that. You're not going to like that over time. You can do all the spreadsheets you want, and I guarantee you it's not going to work out that way. So it's just not. So everything makes sense on paper, but then the thing that people forget about spreadsheets is there's humans behind that behavior. So when you calculate that person paying rent, and you calculate an 8% vacancy rate and whatever percent for maintenance and repairs, don't throw it out the window. You should do all that work, but at the same time, you got to know that that's probably not going to work out. So in my later entrepreneurial ventures, I have right now I'm selling socks. So I come up with, what are my costs? What does it cost me to produce a pair of socks, ship a pair of socks, all that stuff. But then I always throw in, and everything I do now has a Brian screws up tax. So I always calculate a certain percentage that, who knows?
Right.
Who knows what's going to happen? Exactly. So everything that I mess with now has a Brian screws up tax. And I don't think I screw up that much, but everything
but it's a good point, because people should go back, though, to what they thought it was going to look like, and then why didn't it, and then let's make sure we're not making that same mistake or that same error the next time. And I don't think a lot of people go back and really determine that. I think they take the numbers and just kind of move on from there, too.
Yeah, and if your model is flawed, you have some issues there. So
are you a person that likes to do you pour over the numbers, the spreadsheets? How often? I know you've moved to a property manager, and you get some pretty good reporting, I think, from them, but how close of an eye do you keep on it these days? Financials.
I wouldn't say terribly close, because I got involved with so many other things. It's hard to just pin down every single number, and I feel like my personality type is growth, not perfection.
Yep.
So I'd rather outsell or outgrow an issue than try to. You can't save your way to prosperity, basically, right? So if I'm going through every expense I have and beating up my insurance agent and beating up my property manager and beating up the telecom companies, how much time am I spending trying to save 50 cents or $1 here or $10 or even $100 a month or whatever else, when I could be taking that same effort and applying it to a different business? Or I'd rather grow than manage. If that makes sense.
Yep. So a majority of the holdings that you have, did you buy them in the 07, 08, 09 time period? And how many houses do you have, or how many units right now?
So in 11 that I'm working with now, in one way, shape, or form. In they were all 06, 08, and then recently I bought one just very recently, and that was kind of a weird situation, but I was happy to buy it, and I'm still happy to buy it. So
So you've had a lot of them dating back to 2010, 2011 time frame, basically.
Yeah, I sold a few on land contract, so I guess I'm the bank in that situation, but we'll see how those.
So those properties that you've had, some of the early ones, have you had to do roofs? Have you had to do furnaces? What about, do you have concerns about some of those big expenses coming up at some point?
Yeah, and I think that's where you pay the piper on some of those maintenance mistakes I made earlier in the process. I haven't had a ton of those, to be honest with you. So like a roof or furnace. I mean, I've certainly replaced one or two or three, but not enough to say like I have the worst luck ever. It's been pretty good. And houses generally, if you think about your own house, it doesn't need a ton. But again, staying on top of those things, you can make a couple $100 problem into a couple $1,000 problem real quick by not paying attention to it. So I drive around and look at them from the outside quite a bit, and just keep an eye on the tenants that are, even though I have no idea who they are because my property manager works it out, which is great. But I still like to personally keep some idea what's happening. So, compare that with the stock market and you have no idea what's happening. Right. So that's why I like real estate. Your last guest is a great listen. If you're out there listening, go find episode 1. He's got a lot of great insight, but I just like I like the income that real estate produces, and that's where you don't really get from stocks and investing. You don't get income. You get appreciation, you get gain, you get those things, but they don't take that at the grocery store. Right. So I like cash flow because they take that at the grocery store.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about, so you've got a property manager now. How many did you go through before you got to this one that you worked with?
That's a great question. So finding that partner is really critical. The first property manager I hired, she was really good at spending my money because she wanted to get my properties to a point that she would be proud of owning them, which I totally understand. But at the same time, like, that's not the properties that I bought. That wasn't the strategy that I employed. My properties are a little bit rougher, and you're going to get a little bit of a rougher tenant, and they're going to be rougher on the property. So you have to plan ahead for that and charge for it or maintain it or whatever you're going to do to work around that issue. So eventually we parted ways because she was just spending way too much money trying to make these houses into something they aren't. Then they're never going to be. So but she was really good at reporting and really good at providing numbers, but not so great at making do. Right. And the gentleman I have now is really good at making do and, buying a used appliance instead of a brand new appliance. And he's careful with my money, which I really appreciate. Maybe not as classically perfect at providing me reports and all the numbers I'm looking for. But I have an accountant as well that I work with that kind of comes over the top of all that and manages that relationship to make sure it's kind of a series of checks and balances to make sure no one's embezzling or doing something nefarious. I mean, that's always a thought on my mind is like, whoa, they have access to this bank account and I have access to this bank account. How can we make sure that all this is going to be copacetic? And so that's kind of the strategy that I watch it to some extent. I have an accountant come over the top and watch everything, and then they provide their numbers. So between all three of us, we'll catch any weirdness. Yeah,
that's good. That's a good point. The trust that you build with that person, because you are giving them access to your bank account, and they're really responsible for a big chunk of your net worth or in your portfolio holdings.
Yeah, and the liability issues too. If they don't maintain something, that lawsuit would certainly involve me because it's my LLC on the property and things like that. But I've never had that happen for the record. So
let's touch on liability. How did you buy those first properties? Did you buy them in your name or an LLC, and how has that evolved over the years?
Yeah, I got a LLC figured out right away, and I think there's really no excuse not to do that. They're so easy to do, and they're very cheap to accomplish. You can do it online through the state all by yourself. You don't even need an attorney. An attorney might be certainly if you have any sort of partner involved in your business, you should absolutely 100% get an attorney involved in your LLC setup. But if it's just you, it's pretty straightforward, and it provides one little speed bump to somebody attacking your personal income and your personal net worth, then it's absolutely worth $130 to file it, and then $75 a year or $35. I don't even know what it is, but not much. So so I bought all mine in LLCs. I have one LLC that owns the majority of them. Another LLC is going to end up owning a few of them here in the next year for the Airbnb side, and I have couple other LLCs that I own to do all the e-commerce stuff that I do in my life. So yeah.
And what is that? I'm sure there's people thinking, what does that do to my financing the properties? And does that lead to more of a tricky financial situation trying to get those financed? How has been your experience?
I've never really had an issue. So I have a good credit score. I have some cash in the bank. So, I mean,
check.
Yep. Those are important. So I don't think I had to get too crazy on the financial end of things. And back in 2006, I still didn't have to provide really any money down. I just had to show that I had the capability, which I did. So that was sufficient. I didn't actually have to put the money in. I think that's changed now, where you'd be looking for more of that commitment, which is good for the overall market, I think, and to keep investors out that really shouldn't be owning a house. So if you find that frustrating, there's the reason that it's there, and you should come up with a way to get, by hook or by crook, get some money in your pocket. So that's one of my pieces of advice when people ask me how to get into real estate investing. I say, well, first of all, can you put your hands on $10,000 in the next 24 hours? If that answer is no, I don't buy a house.
Right.
You're not ready.
Right,
and usually I tell people it's even more than 10, but 10, can you put a roof on in the next 24 to 72 hours? Can you replace a furnace in the next 24 to 72 hours? If those answers start to line up as yes, okay, then go buy a rental.
Right.
But till then, you're not only risking your potential, but you're risking the tenant too, because you're going to put them in a really bad spot. You're going to essentially make them homeless if something bad happens because you didn't have the financial wherewithal to survive, and it's just irresponsible. That's all. So there's people living in these houses.
Right.
You can't forget about that part.
Exactly.
So,
all right, let's reset a little bit. So you buy these properties in 2006, 2007, 2008. Did you have a long-term vision, or what is the long-term vision for your real estate portfolio?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not sure that I did at that time. I think my time horizon back then, my mindset was I'm going to own these houses for 5 years and then try to move each one of them along and then maybe buy some more. And in the end, that didn't happen. I still own all the original ones. And I think the reason for that is because when things slid in 2008, and I'm a bit panicky about owing a good amount more than these houses are worth at the time. Then I think my vision shifted to, I got to hold these, because I sort of developed I absolutely developed a mindset of, I will not lose money on these houses. I will not lose money on these houses. So the best way to not lose money on houses is to own them for a long time. And I would say if somebody would have offered to buy all my houses as recently as 2 years ago, I probably would have sold the whole thing kit and caboodle. But now I'm quite happy to have them. I don't need to sell them. They don't cost me any time or effort, really. They recently are costing me a lot of money to get some of them converted to Airbnb, but I'm really happy with the direction that's going. But so now I think I have a vision to do more of this mix of long-term renting and Airbnb. But I mean, that's quite a few years to develop this vision.
How has the appreciation of the properties gone over the last?
I'd say there were a number of years where not really much happened. But was it 2 years ago that Appleton did a citywide reassessment, and they talk you through all these things about how that's not going to affect you, and okay, it definitely affects things. But for me, it's all been really positive effects. So all the properties sort of overnight, since that assessment happened, overnight, all those properties are worth considerably more. So should you put any stock in the assessed value of a property when you go buy a property? No, not really. It has nothing to do with the market value. But in reality, people use that as a point of information all the time. So it does affect market. So then if everything's going to go up by whatever percentage they did, I forget, then now that's affected the reference point across the board. And when you own multiple houses, all these things start to have this cumulative effect, right? So I'd say 2 years, pretty flat for 2 years. Like I had doubts if I could get out, still, even from 2006, if I could get out of these, I'd say as recently as 2018, where I was like, I don't know if I could, I don't know if that house would sell that much. There's a couple things there. One, I wasn't paying a ton of attention to real estate at the time. I wasn't in the market. I was just letting my property manager everything. I had no idea what a house could sell for, would sell for. So about a year and a half ago, I started getting my head back into the real estate game, and then started to get a sense of where the market was heading, looking at more listings, driving by, seeing less signs or more signs in a particular neighborhood, and seeing national news about the real estate market and all those types of things. So, yeah, it was. I think the appreciation in the last 2 years has been astounding.
Yep.
And I'd say even in the last 6 months has been unbelievable.
Right.
And Yeah. Over the summer, I sent somebody was asking, an investor was looking at some stuff, and I sent an offer to the real estate, or not an offer, but a real estate agent, what I would take for these houses. The person went and toured all of them, and I thought, oh, for sure, this is going to work out. And they ended up not making an offer at all. And now I look back at what those prices they would have had, even as recently as the summer, because the pandemic was freaking me out a little bit. And I was like, maybe I'm overexposed in real estate. I'm glad they didn't buy them because now I look what I was willing to sell them for now and what they're instantly worth, even just as little as 6-8 months later. Like, oh my gosh, I'm glad that didn't work out. So that's always the feeling you have with real estate is, people that have owned their family house forever, their dad dies and then the family takes over and then they sell the house instantly. And years later you ask them like, well, how long did you own that? Oh, we sold it right away. Boy, I wish we still owned that house. Boy, I wish we still owned that house. So I would hear that all the time, and I think like, well, I don't want to experience that. I'm just going to keep owning the house, and then I'll be the beneficiary. And part of it too is shifted. Jumping back to your last question about where the vision is. Part of it shifted after having kids too, and my kids are 11 and 9, and just sort of shifting to 12 and 9. Sorry, that'll cost me. Shifting to how can I put them in a position to have some generational wealth, responsible generational wealth that this is available to potentially pay for their college, or we could sell one of the houses and pay for their first house, or whatever we need to do to help them have some of those advantages that I had from my parents. So that's been a big shift for me recently. I don't necessarily need all those things to work 100% for me all the time, but I don't want to sell them because my wife and I were talking about selling this house we're converting to Airbnb. She said, well, you could sell it. You could make all this money in one chunk. I'm like, yeah, but what do you do with it? Right. I don't know. What do you do with it?
Right,
so
exactly.
I don't love the stock market again because you can't make income from it. It's been good to me, but still it doesn't produce monthly income. So I don't know.
So was location important when you bought these houses, or was it more about, this is available and let's get comfortable with the location?
No, we definitely had parameters when I was buying, and that part of it was from my mentor, Chuck. The bigger the house, the better in his model. Single families are better because they give you more escape routes. Sure. They're much more liquid than duplexes. I do own a couple duplexes, but they're much harder to sell, and they don't get the appreciation that a single family house would or has enjoyed in these recent markets. There's drawbacks to single family houses as well, of course. So less rent per taxes, less rent per, all that stuff. 100% risk if it's vacant, on and on and on. So 3 bedrooms or more if it has, and plus, everything better. Yep. More basements. The more bedrooms it has, the better. If it has a garage, that's better. If it has a bigger yard, that's better. And then we really tried to stick to Appleton. Right. I love Appleton. I love the city of Appleton. I think it does all the right things. Somebody asked me if I would buy stuff in Green Bay the other day. Nope, absolutely not. Don't like Green Bay at all. Love Appleton. I own one in Kaukauna, and it's been fine, but I don't even know why I bought it. I just want to keep everything in Appleton.
Good. So. Yeah, again, it's important. Know your location, know the area, know around it, and like I said, stick to what you know. Yeah. What about the tenants? How has that been? You can talk about before you had a property manager, or now that you got a property manager. I mean, have you always been able to find people? Have they stayed for a good amount of time?
Yeah, I think the roughness of the houses had some revolving door effect in the beginning, but now that we start doing credit checks and making sure these are responsible people, then the turnover that my property manager has been able to bring to the business has been way better. Sure. So when I was managing it, it was pretty quick. People were in and out, and I was real aggressive with, and I think you should be, with late payments and posting notices immediately. Right. And I quickly got emotionally detached from whatever's going on in their life is absolutely not my problem. Right. I did not cause you to be unemployed. I didn't cause you to get a job cut. I didn't cause you to be sick. None of that is my fault. I feel bad for you, but I'm responsible to my LLC. Really is kind of how I wrap my head around that, is that I'm an investor in my LLC. I manage the LLC, but the LLC is kind of its own entity, and I have a responsibility to produce income for that LLC. And that, if you almost use that as an excuse to walk your way through that emotional minefield of dealing with other people, but you just have to, and it doesn't take long to learn that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, because if you go too long without getting your rent, and you continue to kind of believe that they're going to eventually pay you, but they don't pay you, that's like I said, that's money that you're foregone, and you still have things to pay for.
Yeah, and when you own enough of them, it becomes very predictable.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard the same stories, you've gotten the same excuses, and you do legally what you need to do to move on. And it's
so you have had to do some eviction type notices and
tons.
Okay,
So,
all right.
And it's not that bad. You know, people would say like, "Oh, this eviction, it's going to take them months to get up." Nope, just look up the laws. As long as there's not an eviction moratorium, it's really straightforward.
Right.
And most people won't fight you tooth and nail to the last minute. In fact, I've never had one that took me all the way to removing their items.
Okay.
They've certainly left a lot of items, but I've never had to go and physically remove their items to get them completely evicted.
Good.
So that process is really not a big deal. I think people overdress that as being a huge problem. And
Sure.
it's unfortunate. It causes a lot of emotional distress in their lives, and there's a lot of socioeconomic things that are affected by eviction. But that's not an area that I can't be responsible for affordable housing or homelessness.
Sure.
I can't touch those things. I'm just responsible for an LLC, and I'm going to do the best thing I can to make that LLC profitable so I can be a ongoing entity. There's plenty of resources to be able to do those other things. It's not me.
Yep.
I'm not equipped to do that.
Sure. So as we sit here, it's about a year from when COVID kind of started. How scared were you of what COVID was going to be and about keeping your properties full and what that was going to look like?
Well, I was definitely that definitely got my full attention. So when we went to lockdown, I thought everyone's going to lose jobs, and certainly the tenants stereotypically have these jobs that you think are going to be the first to be affected, and I don't think that was the case. I think they ended up being fairly okay with most of their jobs. We didn't have anybody miss rent on us in this whole time.
Great.
So, but proactively, I called you right away and was like, hey, I'm your friend. So I just wanted to get ahead of it and figure out how we could manage through it if we did have that. And if we had 6 out of the 10 units not paying, that's going to start to be a real problem. Like how many months what would be my burn rate? I started doing these calculations. How many months could I maintain this? How quickly could I sell these properties? What do we need to do to be in a position to sell the properties? All these. So I was working on worst case scenarios for probably a month, pretty extensively, but none of it happened. So I don't know. I think we're okay.
I think that's the thing. Whether it's just the conservative nature of Wisconsin or being in the Midwest, I don't know if the East and West Coast are going to feel some of those effects earlier, and we can predict the best that we can that it's going to sweep over to us. But like you said, we had battened down the hatches and we'd been prepared with deferrals and different things like that. But for the most part, it seems like that single family and duplex market, those renters have been continuing to pay and have kind of kept their jobs. And
you never know where these silver linings are going to be, right? Like now everybody wants to move into a single family house. Everybody wants more space, working from home, and all of that benefits me. Even the price of new construction skyrocketing, that benefits somebody who owns a bunch of single family homes. I mean, could I have predicted those things? No way. But am I the beneficiary of them? Yes. But that's where, like luck is putting yourself in a position to have opportunities.
Exactly.
So I just happened to get lucky on some, I don't even want to use that word. I happen to benefit from some of these opportunities.
Yeah.
So it's not luck. It's hard work meeting opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the perfect time to talk about your pivot into the Airbnb and kind of that thought process and kind of where that's headed for you.
Yeah, so I just want to, when I started getting my head back more in real estate, I just want to evolve with the market, right? I want to stay current with it. So I was lucky enough to hear somebody speaking about his experience with Airbnb in Appleton, and seemed to be a really positive experience. And I thought, well, I own a bunch of properties and maybe I'll try that with one of them. And certainly the first thing that comes into anybody's mind is, why would anybody visit Appleton? Period. Why would anybody visit Appleton and then stay in an Airbnb? And I think the list is really long. I mean, I've got this one property up and running, and it's been a great experience. It's way more fun. And financially it's working out well. There's definitely more work and more operational things involved with it, but I'm embracing that. And then I don't think I don't worry anymore about why people are coming to Appleton or why people would stay in Airbnb. I think the overall trend line for short-term rentals is going from the absolute basement to, I don't even think we're to the first floor yet, and I think it's skyrocketing up. I know me and my family, when we go somewhere, that's now the default that we look for, is to go to Airbnb first before we do a hotel. Now, if we're going one night, we'll stay in a hotel. It's a
Yep.
lot easier. But if you're going to be there 3-4 nights, Airbnb gives you that experience. It's more space.
Yep.
You don't have to feel crowded. You get your own parking.
Yeah.
Depending on where you're going, right? But
And just for the audience, so again, your Airbnbs they're not up north Wisconsin.
Nope.
They're not on a lake. They're kind of
Yep.
downtownish Appleton.
close to downtown Appleton, and I think the thought process there is as close to downtown as I can get is advantageous because people are going to the PAC when we fire all that stuff back up, and they're going to visit people at Lawrence or whatever the case is. So there's plenty of reasons to go to downtown, or they're just coming for the weekend to get out of wherever they're coming from to go do something. But most people are staying. My experience has been to visit friends and family in Appleton, or ice fishing trip was one group, and weddings and stuff like that.
Sure.
So
how far are you booked, or how do you?
that's a good question. So that's up to you as the host. You can set whatever parameters you want. So I think I had a 6-month limit for a while, and then I've removed that, I believe, because I'm not going anywhere. So so I've got bookings all the way out in October that I got a couple weeks ago. Somebody booked a weekend in October, and EAA is certainly covered, and on and on and on. So this next house I'm converting right now is I just listed it, but for the next 3 months it's going to be occupied by some girls from Lawrence that are graduating, and it's just easier. They don't have to convert utilities. They don't have to set up Wi-Fi. They don't have to house it. Like, you show up with a suitcase and you're moving in. And if you don't like it, then you go somewhere else. It's super simple. So if you want to go to Florida for a month, great. And I think the work from home thing is only going to make that better. I mean, I certainly look at it. If our kids, now they're kind of back to school, if they weren't, or my wife has been back to school for a long time. If she wasn't back to school and the kids had more flex, we could go anywhere. It doesn't really matter. As long as I have an internet connection, I can do what I need to do.
Yep.
So,
It's going to be very interesting to see how that shift continues to play out. I do think work from home is going to be around for a long time because, again, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, basically.
Right. And I got a day job in there for a few years, and I worked at a digital marketing company that embraced working from home, and it's really no problem as long as you have all the tools and resources to accomplish what you need to accomplish. And a lot of people can be far more productive at home. And the proof is in the pudding. If they're not productive, you'll see it pretty quick.
Right.
So it's okay.
I've got a lot of things I still want to cover, and we're getting short on time. But how about, you talked about mentors a little bit. How your first mentor, and how has that evolved? Or have you continued to try to find mentors?
I don't reach out a ton anymore. I try to surround myself with people that have the same mindset to me is more important. I don't really care what they're doing. I just care that they're an entrepreneurial brain. And then I love the energy and can come up with lots of ideas. I get approached regularly. I teach entrepreneurship at Fox Valley Tech as well, so people interact with me there through the class or through the free session we run, and people ask me to be their mentor, or ask me for advice or things like that. I guess I am okay doing those things. I guess I would give people advice when you reach out to a mentor, try to think why they would want to talk to you. So offer them something. And like my classic example is I'd show up to somebody to ask me to go out to coffee and ask me about Kickstarter or these other things I do, and they wouldn't buy my coffee. And I was like, I don't think we're going to be friends if you don't have like these basic social skills of you're impeding on my time. And like, you don't have to compensate me, but at least buy the coffee, man. Come on.
That's one thing in this whole work from home thing that it's going to be interesting to see how, because again, we've been used to Zoom calls and all this stuff like that, and even going to lunches, networking lunches and things like that. When you start to calculate in the time that you're spending driving and all this stuff, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to say the least. What about very interested in asking you this question? How important is branding and just the overall scope of your success, or branding tips for new investors?
Yeah, so with real estate, I don't think I put too much stock in the branding thing. I did try billboards when I was doing lease options just for a minute, just for direct response, not for brand building, just to see if people were interested and would call. And that didn't really work out, but I don't think I tried it long enough to make it a thing. So the real estate stuff, I don't brand myself whatsoever. And the rest of my life, I focus a ton on branding. So I own some e-commerce brands and an alpaca sock brand and a bicycle tool brand and a couple other things. And then I sort of converted to my own personal brand for a YouTube channel I'm running. And in that sense, I think it's really important. I think the long-term play for me, like on the cycling thing, is if I can get people to pay attention to me in any way, shape, or form, then I have an audience that's captive and we can do something with that. So there's a great book called 1,000 True Fans. It's phenomenal. So if you're ever thinking about why you would want to start a brand or why you would want to start a YouTube channel or struggling with the courage to do those types of things, read that book, and that will give you a lot more courage. And then I would also say, I just look at it like, well, I'm paying Facebook like tens of thousands of dollars in Facebook ads over the years and more. A lot of Facebook ads for my various brands. So essentially all you're doing at that point is renting eyeballs from Facebook, and you're paying for that. So at some point you got to ask yourself, well, can I develop my own eyeballs?
Yep.
And I think YouTube is a wonderful platform to do that, because YouTube will pay you along the way. It's a lot of work, but it's a long-term play. So yeah, branding is important. Depending for real estate, maybe not so much, but if you're trying to do anything else, you need to be thinking about your personal brand.
That's great. I think that's very good advice. What about any myths about real estate that you want to debunk, or that you had to kind of wrap your head around over the years?
So for it's not a fast process. So I think you watch the TV shows and you see people flip something and they make a pile of money in one time. I mean, does that happen? Yes, but is that a business model? Oh man, I don't know. That's a lot of hustle to try to get those opportunities, and you got to spend all that money. It's just fraught with risk. So I think I have evolved to approach real estate as much more of a 10-year outlook. If you don't have a 10-year outlook on a piece of real estate, I don't know why you'd buy it for 10 months.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's probably the number one thing I see is people wanting to jump in and jump out and jump in and jump out. And I just don't think that's a good way to approach it. I think approaching to buy one and keep it for a while is you'll definitely be safer. Sure.
How have you approached the rent amount that people are paying? Do you feel like you're in the middle of the range, or how do you evaluate if you're charging the right amount for your places?
I think Facebook Marketplace makes that exceedingly easy these days. So I think what a lot of people do is they'll go through that and they'll try to go under some of those, and I think that's a mistake. So go through that. You'll see properties that are nicer than yours, but don't discount yours. Yours has got its own attributes. So put your price accordingly, and I think you'll be okay. My property manager does the majority of that, but in reviewing that, I feel like in the last few months, it certainly seems low to me. And especially after starting some Airbnb stuff, I can rent the whole house for quite a bit more. I have more risk, and it costs me a lot more money to set those houses up. But I think in the long run, it's going to be a better play. So yeah.
Getting back to just making that leap, I mean, how long did it take you to analyze the Airbnb, move into the Airbnb?
The Airbnb one was interesting. It wasn't. So there's two things that gave me confidence in diving into Airbnb. Number one was hearing that person speak about his experience in Appleton. Number two was I have a friend in St. Louis that kind of got into it at the same time and has really quadrupled down on Airbnb and had some pretty good success even through the pandemic. I mean, rough time for the pandemic at first, but now they're bouncing back and doing well in St. Louis. So for me, it was like, well, I've owned the properties long enough that my risk was mitigated. So if I'm going to pump in a couple $10,000 to these houses to get them dressed up and looking pretty and furnish them, what's the worst that's going to happen? Well, I'll have a much nicer house, and it'll be much easier to sell if it doesn't work out. And there's almost no chance that I would take that house after putting all that money into it and going back to long-term rent, because I know it would just break my heart to see it all wrecked. So I would sell them at that point. But now I feel really confident.
Yeah, that's a good strategy. Like I said, if you're getting comfortable with parting with that property, and you've had the success you've had, but like I said, you dress it up a little bit. And
I will say this: a good starting strategy for somebody watching might be to investigate something called Airbnb arbitrage. Okay. So you would rent from a landlord, and then you would do Airbnb over the top of that lease.
Okay.
As long as you disclose all that to the landlord and they don't have a problem with it, it's fine. There's a lot of landlords that don't want to mess with Airbnb, don't understand, and it's too techy for them, all that stuff. So I totally understand that. But there's a lot of people that don't have enough capital to go buy a rental, but they can do this for really no money other than the furnishings and the furniture. So that's actually the model that my friend in St. Louis does, and they've just been crushing it with very little actual money in there.
That's a great point. I really appreciate bringing that up, because I do think that's very interesting and definitely kind of a different angle for people.
It's a great way to start, and then you take some of that income that you're producing, and then you start saving up to get your own place. Because I think the long-term failure of that strategy is you don't own anything, so you're not going to get the second best part of real estate is equity. You're not going to get the second best part. You're only going to get cash flow, which is cool, but equity will change your life. Cash flow will buy groceries.
Yep, exactly. Well, again, I think we've hit on a lot of big things throughout this whole podcast. Is there anything at the end that you want to any wisdom you want to leave for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing is no matter what entrepreneurial journey you're trying to embark on, think about confidence as your number one challenge. So don't think about what I'm trying to accomplish, like I want to buy 10 properties or I want to buy 100 or whatever else. Just how am I going to get enough confidence to buy that? Not even to buy something. How am I going to get enough confidence to feel like I can go out and look at properties?
Sure.
Once you check that box, now I've seen 10 properties. Do I have enough confidence? Or 100 properties, however many you want to see. Now you're gaining confidence on that next decision point to buy one. So to me, chart out what are those steps to get to where you want to go, and then just gain the confidence to move up those steps. So if I told everybody, it's biting the elephant or eating the elephant analogy. But I bring this up in my class all the time. If I told you by next week, hey, I want you to start a business. Well, that sounds really ambiguous and difficult. But if I tell you, hey, by next week, I want you to have business cards, a logo, and buy a domain name. Okay. I think anyone with access to Google can figure all that out, right? So the difference in those two situations was I'm providing step-by-step instruction to tell you what to do next versus giving you an ambiguous goal. So if your ambiguous goal is I want to survive off real estate, you got to break that down. Sure. And then you'll knock it down every time.
Yeah. Doesn't cost any money to go to Zillow and just run the numbers on a property or to drive past some locations and start to kind of visualize what that could look like for you.
Visualization. Yeah. That's a whole other subject that I adore. So.
Yeah. So again, we didn't get to touch on any of the entrepreneurial side of Brian. Brian has got a ton of things going on. So you really want to find him on the socials. What is the best place for people to reach you?
Probably the easiest way is my website is briandavisraces.com. That's RACES because I love bike racing. So Brian Davis Races, and on that page you'll get links to a lot of my other weird stuff that I've done. So
great.
Yeah,
we'll try to put some stuff in the show notes. But again, try to find Brian. He's got a lot of good things going on, and with that, we're excited to again have you in here, and thank you for sharing some of your knowledge with the people.
Thanks, Chad. It was a pleasure. Thank you.